turn a sinner's stable to a Bible tent. It's a hell of a place to be heaven sent. It's getting so down for me. Well, it all...
Back then, there were only a few venues to play, and most all of them were either out of reach or somehow less desirable than the Mellow Mushroom. Eddie C's seemed like a bad idea from the beginning. More on this place later. Shamrock hadn't hit our radar yet. More on this later. And Sidebar was too big a room at the time. Also, we quickly learned that the frat scene wasn't for us. This leaves Common Grounds. Common Grounds literally and symbolically stood alone on the 900 block of University Avenue, in a stretch of town that was distinctly not downtown or campus. It made itself known by old movie theater-style letters hung up on the facade of the brick square building. It was originally opened as a coffee shop, but eventually turned into a venue when the cover dish and hardback closed and ska bands needed a place to play. The rest is history. When you walked in the front door, the stage was immediately to your right while the bar was to the left. The trademark checkerboard floor was unmistakable. Being the early 2000s, there were no restrictions on smoking indoors, so you could literally spoon the smoke out of the air. It was very clear that the cool kids were playing in their cool kid bands at the cool kid venue, which obviously was Common Grounds. Their names all seemed to have 3 random words strung together like Army of Punch or Brickfoot Ninja Squad. Sorry, Connor. One band who played there was called Robotics. They were 2 oddball white rappers who had a hook that went, "Robotics rules the scene. From Wayward to Leo's, you know what I mean." And even back then, I totally did know what they meant. The few blocks from Leo's by the Slice until recently, the eternally present den of black t-shirt, tatted up counterculture located just east of 13th Street that unofficially signaled you have left the U.S. campus area. To Wayward Council, a loosely organized co-op of a record store that didn't seem to make any money in the last punk rock business before you could consider yourself downtown. These were scene turf, plain and simple. The reason that Common Grounds was never completely written off by us is because major indie acts like Pinback and Frank Black played there as their North Florida tour stop. It was still the room to play, and sure, we'd go see them every now and then. As far as the scene bands, though, we never saw any of them play. Ever. Here's why. To attend a non-national show at Common Grounds back then meant to defer to the scene's exclusivity. To pay our $5 to see Pari Passu or Towers of Hanoi or Beat Buttons or Tadpole Fad would be embarking on an unintentional pilgrimage to the holy land of the scenesters. Nothing against any of those bands. There was one exception. On a Thursday night in early March of 2003, Swayze released the album A Shame Play. By this point, GainesvilleBands.com was up and running and already operating as a pre-social media hype machine. The GBDC buzz about this show was staggering. What we didn't realize at the time was that it was just a handful of the band's friends, quote, bumping the thread. In that era, if you had a big show, your band members and friends would comment at regular intervals on the discussion forum to bump it to the top of the forum, making it seem like the show was a bigger deal than it really was. Still, it seemed like we should be there. Part of our motivation was a desire to check out the competition. Everyone was there. We didn't know many people in town yet by name, but we knew their faces. They were the waitresses, bartenders, burrito chefs that we'd seen on a daily basis. They were all at this show. I remember that vividly, thinking, these guys must be huge. It wasn't until I went to a subsequent show that I realized that this wasn't Swayze's regular crowd. They typically played to much smaller audiences. Either way, we only stayed for a few songs, again, probably feeling too intimidated to relax and enjoy. The audience was dead silent, enraptured. I remember being surprised that they were an acoustic act with no drummer who did 4-part harmonies. The impression was made, however, and we saw what could be. We knew we wanted to be a respected local band and understood the importance of a CD release at Common Grounds. Another eye-opening Common Grounds show was going to see El Robot, a GainesvilleBands.com darling with a ton of hype. When the show started, I was shocked to realize there were only 3 other people in attendance. I'll never forget how the lead rapper, Alan, plugged a Furby into an amplifier while the bass player, Morgan, sported faux S&M attire. This show was important because we saw the man behind the curtain. We started to understand buzz and hype and how it was complete bullshit. We had been playing shows, working our asses off to get friends there, getting pressed to get students there, even taking out ads on the radio to get strangers there. These scene bands were just full of hot air. We might be onto something without realizing. For bands like us, booking at Common Grounds seemed literally impossible. The owner, booker, Nigel, was famous for his "check back in 2 weeks" response. It was somehow worse than a no. Many bands that didn't fit the punk mold or have scene connections were simply unable to get booked there and frankly gave up trying. This turf seemed off limits to our band. In fact, years later, I would be delighted to learn that another local band named Crash Pad wrote a song called "Nigel, Book Us, Damn It." As we'd scrounge shows together ourselves, we'd find other oddball bands who also couldn't break into the Common Grounds calendar. We developed a mutual distaste for their perceived cliquishness. As a result, we built a network of like-minded musicians and bands who all shared a desire to play. We might be onto something without realizing. Eventually, Common Grounds moved to the bigger downtown location that formerly housed the covered dish. More bands were eventually welcomed into the fold, including us. as local shows tended to draw more regular crowds than the niche indie acts that were touring through. It became the biggest venue in town, with the most respect and appreciation. But as with any labor of love, it couldn't sustain itself after a certain point, and it closed its doors for good.